Hi everyone, my name is Laura and this is Anne of Green Books. I named my channel Anne of Green Books and then realized that's kind of confusing since my name isn't Anne. My name is Laura, but Anne of Green Books comes from Anne of Green Gables. It's the naming system I use for all my creative socials, including my art Instagram and my nail art Instagram. And if you notice that some of my nails have chipped off, no, you haven't noticed. Keep that to yourself. I don't need to know. But yeah, I am Laura and this is Anne of Green Books. I really wanted to start a book YouTube channel, so I figured a good place to start was the Booktube newbie tag. So the first question is, why did you start this channel? I have read about 50 books so far this year. That's kind of a recent thing for me to be so much back into reading, but I've been loving it and I have been speeding through lots of books. And I do have a lot of friends and family who love reading, but I can't necessarily bombard them with all the information about all 50 books that I've been reading so far this year. My partner, for example, also loves reading. A lot of his books are on the shelves behind me along with mine. And sometimes I'll tell him a little bit about the books that I'm reading, but a lot of times they're books I want to recommend that he reads, so I don't want to give him too many spoilers, and I just can't be telling him everything about all 50 books that I've read so far, things like that. So I really just wanted to start this channel to talk about books with more people, share my passion, share something I love and am excited about. And also, like lots of booktubers, I am a socially anxious, shy, homebody introvert. So the opportunity to engage with people online and be part of what I've seen a really awesome booktube community is very enticing. So I'm hoping to build a little bit of a community here. I know that it will be small, possibly forever, definitely at first. But I'm happy to have anyone here who's here. I'd love to talk about books with more people. So the second question is, what are some fun and unique things you can bring to Booktube? I have been thinking about this question so much because Booktube is already a really cool space. There's so many big booktubers who I love and are already making such great content, saying great things, and making really aesthetic, beautiful videos. And I am not really going to be able to bring anything new to the space or bring anything at that same quality or caliber for a while. I think about booktubers that I love, like Reads with Rachel, The Book Leo especially, Carrie Can Read, Meg with Books. I might not have all those channel names totally correct, but I will link them. But yeah, I was really thinking about what can I bring to Booktube. And to some extent, I'm not totally sure that it matters. My motivation for starting this channel is really intrinsic. I think it's going to be good for me to put myself out there, have an outlet for talking about a passion of mine. And I think that's great because I think it's important that my motivation for this channel be intrinsic. It's not about growing a huge following or making money from this because I don't really expect those things to happen anyway, so I can't really be motivated by them. But all that said, I do think that I can bring some fun and unique things. I read pretty widely. I don't really limit myself in the genres that I read. There are some that I just happen to tend to read less of. I'm not a big literary fiction person. From time to time, I find one that works for me, but it's not often. And romance can be kind of hit or miss for me. But I've recently started reading horror, which was a very new recent genre for me. So, I kind of branch out with my genres. I read a lot of different things. I can talk about a lot of different types of books. And I also think that I'm currently in a space where I'm trying to catch up on reading some of the big popular titles, but I also like some books that are a little less well known, and I think I can recommend some interesting books to you guys. To some extent, I think I have some fun and unique things to bring to Booktube just by virtue of the fact that everyone has interesting things to add to the conversation. And I also think that I am a researcher by my day job. So I think I bring a pretty analytical lens to things. I can go pretty in depth about things, and I just have a lot of thoughts and opinions on a lot of things. So, all things considered, do I really bring anything unique or new to Booktube? There's not really anything new under the sun, right? But I am excited to be here, and I'm hoping that we can grow a little bit of a community and you stick around if you're interested. The third question is, what are you most excited for about this new channel? What am I most excited for about this new channel? I feel like I probably already answered this question with the earlier questions, particularly the first one, why did I start this channel? But I think I'll just elucidate on the answers I probably already gave. I am excited for this channel because I love books. I read a lot of books. They're very exciting and interesting to me, and I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of things to say. And I'm really just excited to share them and be a part of the Booktube community. Like I've said, I've seen it be a really great space. So I'm excited for any people who find my videos and engage. I'm excited to have you. I'm happy to have you. Thanks for being here. So yeah, I think I'm just generally excited about talking about something I'm passionate about with people online. The fourth question is, why do you love reading? And this is such an interesting question to me because I'm not sure I've ever really thought about why I love reading. As a kid, I always loved reading. I've loved reading as long as I can remember. I think when I was a kid, I was like 2 or maybe even younger. I don't remember, of course, but I don't remember the stories now. But when I read my first book, it was Robert the Rose Horse. My parents had read it to me a bunch, and then one morning I just kind of read it to myself. Maybe it was just that I had the story memorized, and maybe it was that I knew how to read at that age. I don't know the details anymore, but all this to say, my parents love to read. They raised me with a love of reading, and I've loved to read as long as I can remember. So it's so hard to answer why I love reading when it just feels like second nature to me. But I think this might come out some more in future questions, but I did, like I said, grow up as a kid reading all the time. It was second nature to me. I always had a book with me. We would be at family get-togethers or, doing things with my parents' friends, adults, family friends, things like that. And I would just be sitting in the corner reading a book. I was one of those kinds of kids, which is probably not surprising. I think I probably have nerdy vibes, which is accurate. But yeah, when I got into college and especially grad school, I really fell out of being able to read for fun. I was still reading a lot in college. I was in an honors program where we read a lot of books every quarter, like classic literature and things like that. And in grad school, I was in a science education research program, so I was reading a lot of scholarly articles and research literature. But I was reading so much for work and school and study that I had a really hard time reading for fun. In college, I read some romance. That was kind of the only thing that I could really pay attention to. The familiar plot lines and predictability and kind of comfort of an easy-to-read romance novel was really all I could read in undergrad. And in grad school, I really fell off of reading at all. There were a few times that I read in grad school and a few things that I picked up and got stuck in the middle of, things like that. But now that I'm done with school and I'm in a little bit more of a stable place, a little more mentally healthy, I have been reading so much more again, and that's so exciting. So to some extent, why do I love reading? It's something I've always done. It's something I loved as a kid, and I'm so excited to be back doing something that I love again. But I think that just at its core, why I love reading is I love seeing other people's lives, living other people's lives, seeing how people experience the world, or the imaginative things going on in people's brains, the worlds that people come up with. I love just feeling transported to another world, seeing the ways people put things into words. There's just something so magical and wonderful about reading, and I am not an author, so I cannot put it into words as well as people who I love to read. But yeah, that's why I love reading. Okay, the 5th question is, what book or series got you into reading? Like I said, this is really difficult because I have been reading as long as I can remember. I told the story about how when I was really young, the first book that I read to myself without kind of my parents' help was Robert the Rose Horse. So obviously as a kid, that was the picture book that got me into reading. When I think a little later in life, what really got me independently aware that I loved reading, books that I loved as a kid were The Chronicles of Narnia, The Hobbit, and The Lord of the Rings. Around 6th grade, I read the Redwall books for the first time, and I adored those. I own all of them. As a kid, I read them over and over. I haven't reread them in a while, but I would really love to. And then around middle school as well, I discovered the Percy Jackson books, which I loved. I was a big fan of Greek mythology and astronomy and the stories of constellations as a kid. I liked to stargaze when camping and things like that. So that kind of was my gateway to getting into Greek mythology. And the Percy Jackson books in middle school were so exciting to me. I loved those books. So those are a lot of the books that I loved as a kid. There's definitely just sort of different phases to my reading throughout my life, but it was something that was always there. When I think more into high school, the YA period was really big and really exciting to me. I read a lot of dystopian. I was in high school in the YA dystopian era, so there just was a lot of that, and it was very popular, but I was a big fan of it. I also liked classic dystopian literature, which we were also probably reading in high school English. So I was reading a lot of dystopian in high school. And honestly, in college, that might have been one of the reasons that I also fell off of reading for fun, because I couldn't handle the depressiveness of dystopian fiction anymore, but it was such a big thing that I had read for a while that I didn't necessarily know where to turn to read next, besides some romance novels, as I have said. You know, in college, it was a big romance era for me, and I was also reading classic literature for school, but I don't necessarily remember anything I read for college because it's a blur. And then as an adult, you know, what sort of kept me reading is a lot of sci-fi fantasy. You can see a bit of a thread throughout my whole life of sci-fi fantasy, but it's really exciting to get back into those genres and explore what's new since I was a kid and last really reading a lot. My mouth is so dry. Oh my gosh. Okay, so the next question, I think, is what questions would you ask your favorite booktubers? This is such a good question. I've mentioned some of my favorite booktubers already. I think my probably ultimate favorite booktuber is the Book Leo. Their videos are so aesthetic and cozy and interesting, and she has such interesting stuff to say and such interesting video concepts. So if I were able to ask the Book Leo some questions, I think I would just ask about how their process evolved over time and what the filming and editing process looks like to put out such aesthetic, cozy videos. Basically, tell me the tips and tricks to achieve that level of quality, because I could never. But if I could ask some other favorite booktubers some questions, I think it would just be, what are you reading right now? What are your favorite books? What are your favorite quotes? What parts of books really stuck with you and shaped you? And what books would you recommend? I think just talking about books with people is exciting. I don't know that I have any specific questions for more booktubers if I could ask. Okay, the 7th question is, what challenges do you think starting a booktube channel will be the hardest to overcome? That was kind of a hard question to read. I think there's so many challenges. I've mentioned some of them. I'm an introvert. I'm awkward. I am just scared talking to a camera. I'm scared my partner will overhear me and judge me and think I'm weird. I'm scared my neighbors will see me through the window and be like, who's that girl talking to herself? So there's a lot of challenges, and I really think those internal fears and anxieties are going to be the hardest to overcome at first. I hope that I will get more comfortable and overcome them and move past that pretty quickly. And then I think there's going to be other challenges. I am new to filming and editing, and I have a high bar of what I would like things to look like, but I know I'm not going to necessarily hit that high bar. I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to learn, and I'm going to try to treat it as an exciting learning experience. But I think just learning a new skill, trying not to get discouraged or frustrated, and trying to be satisfied with what I make and put out, particularly editing videos, looking back and seeing myself and hearing myself, I think is going to be really not fun. I'm not a fan of seeing myself on video, and it's going to be annoying. So there's a lot of challenges that I think I will have to overcome, and hopefully all the ones I said will get easier with time, and then probably new ones that I haven't foreseen will arise. Okay, the next question is, when did you start reading? I have said that I was reading as long as I could remember. Particularly when I was a kid, I read a lot myself, but also when I was falling asleep at night, I remember my mom and my dad both reading to me sometimes. I love that experience of falling asleep to hearing a loved family member reading to you. So I think that was probably a big spur for me to get really into reading. But yeah, when I started reading was really, I'd say, since birth. I should also say, with my channel being named AnneOfGreenBooks after Anne of Green Gables, my middle name is actually named for Anne of Green Gables. So really, since birth, I was destined to be a reader. The next question is, where do you read? That is an interesting question because I don't feel like I have a single answer to that. This is probably true for most people, especially big bookworms, but I read all over the place. I really love to read on the bus if I'm going somewhere. I think there's just something very exciting about public transit and the ability to read and not have to be driving. But, I read in my window nook, I read in bed, I read in my sunroom with the windows and the sun streaming in and the birds chirping outside. I read outside, I read at my public library, I read in a coffee shop, I read on the couch, I'll read anywhere. I do love to make it a very cozy space, have some tea, curl up with a blanket, curl up with my cat Andromeda, but I'll read anywhere, especially if it's a good enough book. I can focus on it through pretty much anything. If it's not a book that's grabbing my attention, it can be harder, but I can read a good book through pretty much anything. Oh, I also love to read on vacation. Of course, everyone probably feels this way, right? And I love reading while camping. I love camping in the mountains. I truly think that's the best place to read. I think that's really my answer. We got there in the end. Okay, the last and 10th question. I said that backwards. The 10th and last question sounds more correct. The The 10th and last question is, what kinds of books do you like to read? I really thought there was a question in here about what your favorite books are. I'm getting this Booktube newbie tag from the Booktube wiki page, but I've seen other people, and I can link some of the videos that I mean because I want to link the people that I've been inspired by. I've seen other people do the Booktube newbie tag, and I feel like one of the questions was, what are some of your favorite books? So I will have to add an 11th question to this list and come back to what are my favorite books. But I guess it's similar to this 10th question on this list of what kinds of books do you like to read. Like I said, I like to read pretty widely. Science fiction and fantasy, especially fantasy, are my favorite genres and really where I started reading. But I have been branching out recently, and I've gotten really into horror, especially horror that could kind of just be dark fantasy. I read some T. Kingfisher that I really loved, and I'm excited to read more. But I've also read some Grady Hendrix and really enjoyed it, so I am getting a little more into horror and trying to explore that genre. I do also read a fair amount of romance, but I do typically like my romance best when it's a subplot of a fantasy book or something like that. But don't get me wrong, there's a lot of romance books that I love. I read a lot of romance. What else do I read? I like mystery thrillers, but I don't always know which ones to read. So that's another genre that I'm exploring a little bit more. I also read, across YA and adult and middle grade. I honestly love middle grade books. There are some great ones out there. So I read pretty widely. Like I said, literary fiction is more of a genre that I don't always know how to pick from what I'm going to like. So I'm happy to explore that genre a little more, but it's more new to me. It's not something I read so often, although I love a lot of classics. So I am a big fan of a lot of classic literature, and I love adaptations of classic literature. I have a whole shelf behind me that's just books that are adaptations of classics that I love. All right, so the actual final question that we will do is, what are some of my favorite books? Even though that's a very difficult question, I think it really says something about a person. It really tells you something about my taste and my preferences in books and kind of what you're going to see from this channel. So I have to share some, even though it's so hard to narrow down to a few favorite books. But when I talk about favorites, I always like to have what I call the duh list. So the books that are like, yeah, duh, I love that book. I don't even have to say that it's my favorite. It's just a gimme. It's obvious. So on that list for me would be The Lord of the Rings, although I have not read The Silmarillion yet, so don't come for me. I need to do that. And let's see, other duh books for me would be everything by Jane Austen, except for Sense and Sensibility. I've actually never read that one either. So definitely some holes in my favorite authors that I need to get to. But yeah, Lord of the Rings, everything by Jane Austen, and I was thinking about this earlier, and I had another duh list book for me, and I have completely forgotten what that was. So those are some of kind of my those are some of my favorite books. I don't even have to say them. Really books that I loved as a kid and have stood the test of time and stuck with me all these years. But more recently, as an adult, getting back into reading, some of my favorites are books I've read quite recently, so I'm trying to give them a little time to get past the recency bias and make sure that they stick with me. But I have loved Tress of the Emerald Sea. I love the Murderbot Diaries books. And I very recently read Babel by R.F. Kuang, and when I finished it, I was crying, and I was like, that is probably my favorite book I've ever read. And I have to give it a little time to get past the recency bias, go back and reread it and annotate it, really think about it. But I think that that is one of my all-time favorite books. I will definitely talk more about it in a video at some point because I know some people had valid reasons that they didn't love it, that it didn't totally land for them. But for me, being an academic who went through grad school and still works in academia at the moment, it just put so many things into words for me that I had never seen captured quite that way before. So I know some people criticized it for not necessarily saying enough new things and kind of pushing the envelope enough, and maybe having some flat characters who were sort of caricatures or archetypes. And I think that those are valid critiques, like I said, but the book just put things into words for me that I needed put into words. And maybe I just read it at the right time, but I loved it. So those are definitely some of my favorite books. I also recently loved The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nevo, and I've been reading some more Nevo lately, and I'm very excited about her books. So yeah, those are some of my favorites. I am forgetting some big, important ones. I just know it. But those are some good ones. So yeah, I think that is really everything that I wanted to say in my first video on my new Booktube channel. But if you're interested in sticking around, feel free to like, subscribe, comment. I would love to hear from people, start conversations. But thanks so much for being here, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye!